essentially the foil in this panel. So I'm going to lead off, and I'll identify who I am. I suppose I'm sort of a class enemy here. I'm a Georgist. I'm president of the Henry George School of Science. I'm a former CEO of a Fortune 500 company, and I'm a trained Marxist economist. Okay? So, as my students say, they think I'm a plant. I'm a class enemy. But not really. I'm interested in social justice. Primarily for one reason. I think the world, with elites going crazy as they are, is creating an unstable situation. And essentially, we're now monkeys with nuclear weapons. And sooner or later, that's going to catch up with us. My first book in economics was Henry George. Being Marxist, he's kind of a simple kind of guy. But he's a theorist of monopoly. And so I'll come at my talk from that standpoint. Henry George, of course, was the guy that advocated a single tax on land rents. The argument was that if you tax land, which was the prime resource in the 1860s in America, which it certainly was, that you could eliminate all that you see now. And all that you see now was really outlined by Michael Hudson 30 years ago in a book called Super Imperialism. Now, if you haven't read that book, I'm not shilling for Michael Hudson's book, but Super Imperialism was the book 30 years ago that essentially called what was going to happen and the mechanism as to how it would happen. So that's the book that, got to jump on the left, in my opinion, big time. But as a Georgist, although we argue that land rents now are not the only form of monopoly in the country or in the world, we generalize it to neo-Georgism. At least I classify myself as a neo-Georgist, one who believes that all forms of monopoly should be taxed and nothing else should be taxed. No income, no wage taxes, no sales taxes, no taxes on capital, tax on monopoly where it's found. Now, historically, we Georgians are looking for monopoly. If we go back in time, or we have gone back in time for thousands of years, we come to the conclusion that essentially 1/3 of all the surplus produced in any economy, at any time, is a rent of some sort. It's a price taken from the economy without a cost basis that's legitimate. And it's taken essentially by guile and force. So that what we have here today, we have the ultimate in guile and force, in this planet. We have Goldman Sachs, brains, guile, and force, writ large. And unfortunately, if I compared Leonard Blankfein, I don't mean to pick on old Leonard who's doing God's work, with a Plantagenet, a Norman Baron in Robin Hood's day. They were the same kind of exploiters, but they did not have the means to extract a lot of surplus. They could extract a local surplus. They could rack the peasants for half their output. They could keep it in check with the church, telling fairy tales to the peasants, building big cathedrals, using elemental force, but they weren't going to blow up the planet. Today, you've got a different kind of a situation. Albert Einstein, back in those days, might have been found behind a plow and not been any the wiser for it. Today you might see Albert Einstein at a derivatives desk at Goldman Sachs. And he can raise holy hell. So there's a difference in degree in monopoly extraction that makes it very pernicious today. Now again, I said that 1/3 of all surplus usually is rent. Now you can say, well, that's a mystical figure. How do you come to that? Is there a theorizing mechanism to get to that? Not really. I think we need some brains to look at that. We just know empirically that apparently that's all society can take. If I gave you a simple Georgist world to make the point, and this was the world, and I claimed it, and I claimed it by this, okay? And I'm pretty smart too. I claim this: if you drop into this world, living by my rules, my wage bargain, and I'm going to basically give you a living. Period. End of story. In a low productivity world, if it takes you 1 banana to live for a whole year, to be absurd, and I have 10 of you here making 12 bananas, you know, 1.2 bananas per person, I'll get the 2, you'll get the 1, you'll stay alive, I got a little surplus. But if I'm as smart as Bill Gates, and I can show you how to grow bananas like crazy, I can give you the software to grow bananas, and you can grow 30 bananas, where you can only grow 1.2, all that extra surplus would come to me theoretically. No, this is just pure elemental bargaining power, and I argue that bargaining power circulates around the world in a hidden, mystical way, but underneath it, it's that. Now, of course, if we say the 1/3 figure holds true, obviously, I can't take 30 bananas from everybody. They can see that. It's too much. I've got it all. They've got very little. It's a disproportionate mix. It's not intuitive. So I have to bring in priests, rabbis, public relations guys, all kinds of stuff to justify this. So I've got overheads to keep this game going. I just wanted to make that point. Okay? So I'll get off that. Then we go back to America of today. You take America from 1945, 1970, come off a depression, come off a war, working class organizations are put together. They can protect themselves with unions. There's legislation against stock market manipulation. Society is more or less held in check. And of course, you can pay the working class off in America because there was no other country left standing after World War II, so you can throw the surplus to workers and keep it somewhat harmonious. But when communism started to falter, Goldman Sachs said, this is good stuff. The example of what might be, the working class falls away. This is a standard story. The left knows the story. And the rules and regulations that kept crazy elites in check started to be peeled away. And in a world of high-speed computers, and in a world where, unlike even 50 years ago, where the very brightest kids in the country are identified early on, wherever they go to school, whatever school, they're tested, they're smart, they're brought to New York, Stanford, Harvard. They live together, they study together, they scheme together, they marry together, and then you include computers and gambling instruments in the stock market, and it's an explosive mix to, in effect, capture the world. Not militarily, but financially. And then if you want to hook the dollar to any standard, not that it's a bad thing necessarily, but if you want to hook it from any standard, and you allow the government basically to print it as needed, and these financial elites can blow themselves up and get the money back, there's no end to the capture that they can make. And the real question is, Michael Hudson is going to tell you the particular details, but my argument is, these details change over time, but the same people end up in charge. The problem is today, it's getting deadlier and deadlier to let these people in charge. This is a out-of-control, elite brain, vicious brain. This is not Mother Teresa's brain. You know, Goldman Sachs' brain is not a Mother Teresa brain. It's a brain that just wants to acquire, not because it's evil necessarily, because it can, because there's no constraints. And what do? They unpack the media, consolidate it to 1 or 2 voices. They dismantle labor unions, and then they, in effect, create virtual corporations that can move around the world, in effect, like many countries that are mobile. So the working class have no shot at defending themselves against outsourcing, insourcing, and all of that. They simply can move and outwit ordinary people to the point where you get the world you've got now. And the world you've got now is an unstable world. It's have to be the deluge type world. Nobody has any real ideas how to stop it. You listen to Obama and all, I mean, these people have no clue. I'm a Goldman Sachs guy, I don't care. I'm only going to live another 15, 20 years. I'm going to blow it out now. I don't care about the future. And if you go crazy on me, I got 64 offshore sites that I can go to and buy some time. So in my opinion, this is what you're facing. Not much you can do about it unless you're all smart enough to say, let's start getting back the institutions that can bring us under control. And the two probably best, three institutions would be runaway corporations have to be regulated, media has to be regulated. You can't have 2 or 3 owners of media. And you've got to recapture the government at the Senate and at the House level, because the financial boys, and again, I'm not picking on Goldman particularly, can't simply buy and pay these guys. If I'm a senator and these guys have all this money, ask Bill Clinton, I'm joining up. You know, I ask my classes the following question: if you can make $100 million gambling at the expense of your country, or you don't make the $100 million and you work the ordinary job that you've got, which way would you go? What do you think the answer is? Take the $100 million and run. So until we institutionally make that the wrong answer, what you see now is what you're going to get. Now, take it from an ex-CEO of a Fortune 500 company. I'm here to tell you, I'm not complaining about this game. I can play it, but it's not a game for humanity to play long term. So I rid my guilt by teaching it and by telling you guys, you better rein it in, or else it'll get out of control and nobody can stop it. But the guy who can tell you how it's really done in a very sophisticated way, the guy who pointed it out first, Michael Hudson. So Michael, wake up and come on up.
The whole fight of classical economics was to free society from the carryovers of feudalism. And much of what people were attacking in capitalism in the 18th and the 19th century wasn't really the dynamic of industrial capitalism at all. It was the carryover of feudalism, of absentee land ownership, and the banking that was primarily usurious banking decoupled from the production process. This was the fight of the physiocrats. It was the fight of Adam Smith and the earlier classical economists. And it was the fight of Europe down into the revolutions of 1848. But in 1848 was a dividing line. And what Marx pointed out was that all of the reformers who wanted to make capitalism work better by getting rid of the rent extractors, getting rid of the landlords who charged such a high price for rent that it was pricing English manufacturers out of the market by forcing workers to make enough money to pay for the rent. By bankers who were simply loading down industry with extra charges. Marx called this the excrescence of capitalism. But the 1848 revolutions showed that the reformers of capitalism really didn't care very much about the condition of labor. They wanted to reform capitalism so that capitalists could grind labor down and extract even more of the surplus value from labor. There was no interest at all in raising living standards. The idea of reforming capitalism prior to Marx was simply to make capitalism work better as an exploitative system. So that's why Marx elaborated Ricardo's labor theory of value to say, yes, indeed, labor is the creator of value and the creator of the surplus. But the question is, who's going to get the surplus? And there are two kinds of labor. One is the price of labor, as all of you know here, that the employer pays. And the other price is what the capitalist sells the product of the labor for. And this was called, at the time, surplus value, and it's generally called profit. But the word profit to Marx did not mean what profit means today, and what the Monthly Review talks about. Many of you have heard of the declining rate of profit. It was Marx who described this, coined the term. He did not mean that capitalism was getting less exploitative or less profitable. What he meant was that profit for him was what today is called EBITDA, cash flow. Earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. And what Marx said was that as capitalism becomes more and more productive by more and more capital per worker, the capitalist has to recover not only the profit on his outlay, but he has to get back the original amount of money he put into the factory. And Marx said that the faster the rate of technological innovation, then the faster the factory owner had to write off his capital before it got obsolete. So Marx developed the obsolescence function and the falling rate of profit. Basically, you have a choice of who to believe in the falling rate of profit. And the way this gets back to what Andy was saying. Who's smarter, Leona Helmsley or the Monthly Review crowd? Leona Helmsley said, only the little people pay taxes. That's what she means by the falling rate of profit. That means that capitalists don't like to pay taxes. They don't declare a profit. They expense it. For instance, in the field, the largest capital investment in the United States in the private sector is real estate, mainly in buildings. There is such a rapid rate of pretending. If you look at the statistics pretend that buildings lose their value within a fairly short period of time. There's no wear and tear. There's no increase in value. So that when you take into account the fact that if you're Donald Trump or a real estate owner, the fact that you depreciate the building and borrow the interest to buy it means that there's no profit left at all. If you look at the National Income and Product Account since 1945, the real estate sector hasn't paid any income tax because it doesn't make any profit. Now, in reality, this is how most of the wealth is acquired in the society. Now, how many of you believe that this acceleration of wealth by the 1% means the falling rate of profit, and that means they're in trouble? It just means that you guys are in trouble because thanks to Alan Greenspan and other would-be smart guys, they've been able to shift the tax burden off capital onto labor, off real estate onto labor. So in order to understand why we're in trouble now, why we're going to austerity, we had an earlier program today at the 10 o'clock session on primitive accumulation, and the whole idea was that primitive accumulation is simply grabbing, looting, redistributing. That was supposed to provide European capitalism with the money that then it would use for capital investment and sort of be a trigger to capitalism. But now we're going beyond industrial capitalism, back towards primitive accumulation. We're going back towards austerity. And the question is, how do we explain that? Well, let's go back to the progressive era, back in the 1870s and 1880s. That was where all of a sudden there was a flowering of classical economics. And the reason that we're here and even mention such a person is the racist journalist Henry George, who got his start by his fuming against the Chinese as racially inferior, and then joined up with the racist Southerners in the Democratic Party. Well, why are we here to celebrate a right-wing racist libertarian? And that's because he began by advocating the land tax for the United States. As a journalist, he popularized the idea of a land tax. Now, when I grew up in the 1950s in Chicago, and there were the big landlords there who were breaking up the neighborhoods, the University of Chicago, the people who became Obama's crowd in Chicago, basically. The whole fight in Chicago was how do you prevent the real estate interests from coming in and smashing up the neighborhoods and taking over politics. Almost all local politics in America is the politics of adding value towards your real estate, putting public transportation to your real estate. Bob Fitch and I, beginning 20 years ago, used to bring the Georgists along to these the left forum meetings or the Socialist Scholars Conference, because what we wanted to do together was to reintroduce the concept of rent to the overall discussion of how the economy worked. Well, what happened was when I grew up, I was under the impression that George was a socialist, because all the socialists I knew thought that the idea of taxing land and moving against landlords was a good socialist objective. We brought the people from the Henry George School here, and they were all worried they were going to get beaten up by the Marxists. I couldn't figure it out until I actually made friends with them, and I realized
weights now.
I realized that the reason I didn't know that they were so anti-Marxist was that they'd fallen off the right wing of the political spectrum. In Germany, they were the first group to join the Nazi Party. In England, they supported who was the World War II leader?
Oh.
What? No. He was Prime Minister. Churchill. The anti-socialist, anti-labor.
The Gaulle was too, right?
Yes, and in China, Shanghai Shek also was, with the Shanghai Massacre, was a great enemy of the socialists. Throughout the early 20th century, the great enemies of the Marxists were the followers of George and the libertarians. And so the question is, what happened? In 1875, there was a mayor's election in New York, and George was selected by the socialists, by the labor unions, as a celebrity candidate, because most socialists at that time thought, okay, not only do we have to get better working conditions and save capitalism for the working class to evolve into socialism, but we have to help save industrial capitalism from feudalism, so there will be something to turn into something. So they nominated George, thinking he'd go along with the general progressive era ideas of bringing the railroads into the public domain, regulating railroad prices, regulating the monopolies. Well, what happened was that George, being a journalist and a self-educated, anti-intellectual, negative narcissist, decided to get bitten by the political bug. He stripped away the entire Workers' Party platform and said, we have a single platform. We're going to do only tax the land. If you tax the land, you don't have to fight for workers' rights. You don't have to fight for workplace conditions. You don't have to regulate monopolies. You don't have to regulate the railroads. Just follow me. And if you talk about any progressive era reform, except land reform, I'm expelling you from the party. Well, you know, those of you who are old enough may remember the old song about Bill Bailey, who started every radical party, you know, until finally he was thrown out. You know, you may be a friend of Matt Scheck, and you may know. Well, his own party expelled him for being a sectarian. Fortunately. But there were enough of them, there were enough right-wingers to say, look, here's a guy talking about what people want to do. He wants to fight landlords. Let's back the Georgists in fighting against the Marxists. So throughout the 1890s and early 1900s, there'd be public debates in Chicago, in New York, between the Georgists and the Marxists. They were all published by Marxist publisher, the socialist company in Chicago, Charles Kerr. And they actually thought, one way or another, American politics is going to be decided. Either you have old pre-1848 capitalism of Henry George, capitalism for the capitalists, capitalism for the rich, and crush the labor, which is what we Georgists are all for, or the socialists are going to have capitalism for the workers who evolve into socialism. Well, it was actually a very good debate because it did keep before the forefront of all of these socialist groups and the workers' group the fact that land rent is just as much of a problem as profits. And the Georgists did have a point. And their point was that, look, most of the capital investment in every society is still housing. And if you let the landlord class take over, there's not going to be any industrial employment to employ you, and either you can be exploited or you won't have a job. And in fact, when I was at the New School and began teaching in 1969, I was teaching about I used as a textbook the first history of economic thought that was written, Marx's theories of surplus value. Marx went over the whole history of price theory, value theory, and Bob Heilbronner, the department chairman, got very upset. He came to me and said I was confusing students I was making them think there was only one way of exploiting people. And he said, and that's to employ them. And you're confusing people, you're talking about interest and rent, you've got to stop that. And I, of course, refused. And at a meeting, he called me a Wall Street thug. And I asked him not to call himself a socialist anymore, but just to call himself the right-winger that he was. Long story short, I went to work for a think tank. But the point is, we all discussed what are we going to do to integrate this right-wing Georgist movement with the your group here, with the Marxist group. What is it? And what we all want to bring about is a focus, once again, on value and price theory. Because what you're seeing today is more rent extraction. You're having something that is no longer industrial capitalism that Marx thought about. Marx is very optimistic. He expected industrial capitalism to get rid of absentee landlordism, and now he does. Now you have 2/3 of every population, America, England, Scandinavia, 2/3 of the population owns its own home, but it owns it on credit. And the most recent U.S. rule by the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the government financing agency, is they will finance mortgages up to the point where the housing mortgage absorbs 43% of the worker's income. Now you can imagine if the worker's paycheck, 43% of rent, 15% is FICA withholding for Social Security and Medicare, meaning tax cuts for the 1%, which they call Social Security, and then 10% in other loans to the bank, then all of a sudden you're up to about 75%, and at 10% other taxes. Only 25% of the paychecks of the American worker goes for goods and services that are produced. Now, almost all of classical economics was about Say's law, the circular flow, the whole idea of capitalism. And this is what they're dealing with in China today. How do you get the workers to earn enough money to buy what they produce? This is what Henry Ford said when he said the reason he pays his workers $5 a day is so they can afford to buy cars. Right now, that's not the case. Right now, you have 75% of the budgets of workers stripped off to pay rent extraction. That does not play a role in most Marxist analysis. Most Marxist analysis focuses solely on worker-employer relations. And the reason is this fight between Georgists in America and the socialists. The attacks became so negative. If you're a Marxist, and like all of you, you're mostly gone to college, you're intelligent, how do you debate with a swamp, with uneducated people that have maybe 3 slogans in their whole brain, which I'm sure Andy will agree, which is what they teach at school. Nothing but sloganeering. You can't argue with religious.
It's almost religious.
Yeah. So the fact is that these labor unions and the socialists said, okay, you talk about rent, we're going to talk about labor relations. And Marx sent a copy of Progress and Poverty, and he said, this is the same argument that you have in David Ricardo and the other idealist capitalist reformers. They want to get rid of the landlords just so they can get as capitalist profits what the landlords used to get in interest. They don't care about the workers. That's what the 1848 revolution showed. And today, as I said, the Georgists are on the right wing of the political spectrum. They are the lobbyists for the construction industry, basically. Their measure of human progress is how much you can build up the low-rise slums, how you can encourage building, how you can shift taxes off building onto land, which means off, in practice, it means onto workers' housing, untax the high-rise. The last time I talked to them a few years ago, they wanted negative land value for all of Wall Street, so that the people, the low income, the working class, would have to pay the entire real estate tax to subsidize the building, to get more building done. Most of the people are builders and from the construction industry, and they're looking for backing from the construction industry. So, in a way, you have Marxism, pro-labor, labor unionism, versus the real estate lobby. Bob Fitch describes all of this in his book, The Assassination in New York, where he talked about how the plan to deindustrialize New York was to gentrify it. And in a way, when he's described about New York beginning in the early 20th century, is suddenly become the entire American economy, turning into a rent extraction opportunity rather than industrialization, dismantling everything. So we're in a position now where instead of the surplus going into profits that are reinvested in producing yet more factories, more labor, and evolve into a high productivity society that Marx would lead for socialism, we have a system where, as Andy said, 1/3 of the GDP is actually going to the rent extractors, to the finance, insurance, and real estate sector, the FIRE sector. Now the difference is that profits are used by the industrialists to reinvest in the business and expand and employ labor. But on Wall Street, when they make capital gains, or when they make interest, or when they make a killing, they do not consume much more, except for luxury Picassos, which doesn't take much current labor. They use their money that they get to buy yet more property or to lend out more. When banks get more money, they lend more money out, and that indebts the economy all the more. So now when you have Bernanke saying, we are going to keep quantitative easing rates at 0.25% until there is enough employment recovers, what he means is we define the 1% as the job creators. And we're going to give the job creators more and more and more money until there's more jobs for the 99%. But what the job creators do, the 1%, is close down industry and make less and less employment. It's called debt deflation. By lending, he said we've got to get the banks lending again so that we can have the American wage earners even further in debt, as if somehow this is going to spur a recovery instead of reinflate real estate prices to somehow save the bank's balance sheet. So the whole idea of the solution to today's industrial capitalist problem by the financiers is yet more debt, more debt deflation, more payments to the financial sector, more payments to the 1%, and their plan is to make the entire U.S. economy look like Greece, or the country that they've taken as the ideal, Latvia, where 20% of the population has emigrated since 2000. In order to have an economic balance of a country such as this neoliberalized, like Latvia, with 10% of the population, it's actually 20% now has emigrated, you would need 50 million Americans to emigrate in the next 10 years. And yet they're not even teaching Chinese in enough schools to enable that to occur. So I'm not sure how they could actually bring any of this about. The other place that the neoliberals have a free hand is in Russia. And,
wait a minute. You're a chief economic advisor to Latvia. What the hell happened?
No, to the opposition party. I'm the guy that left the Hague. I was research director of the Riga Graduate School of Law. I've met with the prime ministers. But in Latvia, they've been able to play the ethnic card. The Latvian, the largest party, that gets 32% of the national vote, happens to be dominated by the Russian speakers, and the Latvians are still so resentful against the Soviet occupation that the neoliberals are able to play the Latvians against the foreigners and blame the foreigners for the poverty. Same thing you're finding in Greece with the Golden Dawn Party against the immigrants there. They're having a dividing and conquer party, and so essentially what you have throughout Europe is a very strange political spectrum. The socialist parties have moved to the far right of the political spectrum, to the right of the Georgists. It was Papandreou who was not only head of the Greek Socialist Party, but the head of the Socialist International. That when Angela Merkel said, you can't have a vote on whether to repay the foreign debts or not, because if you have a vote, the people will vote against it. And Papandreou agreed, and he was immediately, no confidence vote, the party fell, the socialists fell to 8%. Exactly the same thing happened in Iceland. When the Social Democratic Party there supported Gordon Brown and said, we have to pay the debts to the crooks, and debt is a debt. The crooks have stolen it, and we want to join Europe. And Gordon Brown says, if we don't cut our living standards by 70% and devalue the currency by 99%, we can't join Europe. So, of course, we want to seize all of the workers' pension funds and pay Gordon Brown. Thrown out. All over Europe, the Social Democratic parties, the Labour parties, are on the right wing of the spectrum. Tony Blair and Gordon Brown did what Margaret Thatcher never could have done in England. The same situation in Germany, the same situation without. So what is it that happened to the original Social Democratic parties, the original Marxist parties, that has led them to be on the right wing of the spectrum? And the answer is they dropped they ceased to look at the economy as a whole. They're focused so much on the worker-capitalist relationship that they're ignoring the fact that this industrial economy is wrapped in this rentier surrounding, and the rentier surrounding, real estate, finance, and monopolies, are extracting the interest, not as profits, but simply as economic rent. And the definition of rent to an economist, and this is what Marx makes clear in his theories of surplus value, the definition of rent is that part of price that has no counterpart in the actual costs of production. It's a pure rake-off that is technologically unnecessary. Now, that's why Marx thought that industrial capitalism, through its own dynamic, was going to get rid of rent. And not only land rent, but also monopoly rent, by taking natural monopolies into the public domain, like railroads have done, communications, airlines, and roads in Europe, but also finance. Marx expected banking to follow what happened in Germany and Central Europe. Essentially, instead of predatory merchant banking, you would have industrial banking. You would have the Reichsbank from the German banks. All this was changed after World War I, and you had a reversion, and after World War I, you had Stalinism on the one hand that was simply vulgarized Marxism. It's the kind of thing you would learn if you went to the new school, for instance, or you read monthly reviews. That kind of simplicity. And there's really no grounding of Marxism anymore in classical economics. So the one virtue of talking about what the other people are talking about today, monopoly rent and land rent, is to reincorporate the price and value theory that Marx talked about. I certainly would not imply that you get this at the Henry George School. Being so taught, George had no value theory, no price theory. How can you talk about collecting rent for the public sector if you don't have a value and price theory to define what rent is or quantify it? Unless you quantify it, you're not going to get an idea. Andy's quantified it, I've quantified it, until the left begins to quantify it and realize that the problem is not simple. Unfortunately, you have to save the original fight of capitalism to free society from feudalism and to reverse the current primitive accumulation. You're not going to be able to have progress. Probably the Chinese recognize this more than anyone else, and that's why the Chinese are pulling so much money back.
Michael's going to get a free scholarship to the Henry George School.
Things that bad learn fundamentals.
Since Michael has been so auditory of Henry George, I wanted to add much to that. I have an article here from my name is Hehner. I used to know the Henry George School. This is where some of the assessments. I come from Berlin. I have a PhD on the ideological origin of the Holocaust. I did my master's on David Schumann and Adam Smith. I have a classical training classical economics in liberal Marxism and Neo-Keynesianism. Nice to be here. We're here every year, I think. Michael and I and Eddie have been hashing it out for some time. I have an article from the New York Times. Anybody who has missed it can have a look at it. A couple of days ago, Wall Street buyers behind the rise of housing prices. Long story short, they're buying up hedge funds and other funds are buying up property and houses and land in record quantity. And what are they doing? They're creating an artificial monopoly and they're driving the prices up. So the very thing that created everybody agrees that the 07-08 crisis was founded, well, part of it was created by the subprime crisis and by the housing sector and by the land sector. We're having the next crisis is coming. It's coming in a couple of years and we're going to have it. Nobody's saying anything about it. The stock market is roaring, everybody's happy. One thing that gave me a little bit of a glimmer of hope, Julian Assange may not be the most ethical person in the world. I don't know what happened in that famous party in Sweden, but I used to be an investigative journalist. I lost my job because I could link a governor of a state and an attorney general to a murder case. And I had a show on television, something like 60 Minutes, and they canceled it and they said, we're going to give you your money, but we're going to change the ending. I said, no, the next day I couldn't sell a show on the living of cows, so I've been an investigative reporter, I know what that means. Julian Assange, whatever his personal merits or demerits are, divulged more government secrets than all the investigative journalists of all times and all countries put together, with Manning, with a few other hackers, just because today we have the technology to do so. And, as we used to say in German, the government, the ISIS of the government are going on blind eyes. Excuse my French. So there are few people with computer skills who have the high and mighty terminal. So that's one thing. If you haven't seen WikiLeaks, we see the secrets, go see it. It's not bad. So I used to be very pessimistic. I think there are some glimmers of hope. We had a discussion, Michael, Andy, and I the other day. We can distinguish, and we should distinguish between George as a theorist and George as a politician. And as a theorist, of course, you may call him simplistic, Michael, with your awesome erudition. That's probably true. He did stress some things that hadn't been stressed before. The resources factor that he did that 100 years before they even came up with resources, returned resources, and 100 years before they came up with ecology and with concepts of, we one planet and so on. We've had, that's on the abstract of the panel, wages have been stagnating for 40 years in the middle class, the productive class, we are being excluded royally. Japan has had 2 lost decades. Michael has a lot of things to say about this intelligent analysis. Unemployment figures that we get around the world are abysmal. The European Eurozone crisis is very concerning, very disconcerting. Obviously, we had 5 bad years. We've had not a lost decade, we had a half a lost decade. Now we have some money man makes some money, but in the overall, we're still in the dump. We have had recession used to be defined as downturn of 3 quarters. So we've had the official version of the economic crisis we had in 08 and 09 was we had 6 quarters downturn. So in the old definition, in the old parlance, in the old analysis, this is already a depression. It's not being called a depression, it's being called a great recession. We have the next monopolization, the next bubble is building up, the next thing is hitting us. we basically, with some several sleights of hands and some magic tricks, we relegated the crisis to Europe. It's going to come back to us. Again, Michael has written some awesome stuff on it. I'm not a financial analyst or financial historian. I'm an economist. I look at the principles, but this crisis has not gone away. It just looks like it. For a few people, it looks like it's going to come back and it's going to hit us harder. I always used to say, the difference between a beer hall discussion or a coffee clutch in a coffee house and a scientific analysis is that scientists, if they know their stuff, are able to make accurate predictions. There are a few people who have done so. George is more so than others. They have predicted this crisis. Falbury in California predicted it actually in an article in '92, predicted it through the month October 2008.
He made about 50 projections, and had one month, every month right in a row. And if you make 1 month right in a row for 50 projections, you're absolutely guaranteed.
You do agree with me, Mark, that some economists made accurate predictions and others. Most of them missed it. Most of them missed it because if you get paid, as Hudson Sinclair says, you get paid for closing your eyes, paid for not seeing something you don't see. So we have one thing that I just want to add about the theory of Henry George. He doesn't have a theory of value. I think his theory of value from obligation is quite neat. I've never found it in any other theories. What is lacking actually is to have a coalition of the left, to have a coalition of progressive thinking and get a fresh start. Because what we have right now, we have, I mean, just think about it. Think of the irony of it. In China, we're still communists, right? Officially, we're still communists, but it's a market communism, right? It's a free market communism. It's an authoritarian, by the Communist Party, directed free market communism. I mean, Marx would turn in this word. Right? That's nonsense. The worst anathema to any Marxist is the free market. Right? Competition is a dirty word for Marxists. So what do you have on the other hand in capitalism? The capitalism we still have, the capitalism had the most, I mean, George Bush, we wouldn't consider George Bush a progressive, right? We would not. The most gigantic bailout in history, the most gigantic bailout in history of GM, of the great industry, industrial corporations, of the great financial institutions, came through one of the worst and most reactionary presidents we have ever had. So mark that irony. So what we have is we have the old Stalinist system has crashed. The Chinese haven't faced the music. It's not working the way they had it, so they're doing something else. They're introducing the free market. And our capitalist system also ends up there. And there has been a nationalization on a scale that was unprecedented. So we have two systems that are broken. If we don't make a structural change worldwide, you're very eloquent in correctly criticizing the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and so on and so forth. If we don't get the structure changed, we're going to have in shorter intervals worse crises on a larger global scale. And we need to do something about it. So if we can get a coalition of the left, if we can get a coalition of the progressives and start to work out a program, and we were discussing it, I mean, I agree to an extent that Henry George school, not Henry George so much himself, Henry George's ideas were hijacked by right-wing libertarians, right-of-Reagan reactionaries, and they pretty much managed to kill it completely. But if you introduce, you could have a neo-Marxist, neo-Georgist program in which you say, okay, we tax monopolies, we tax resources, we tax surplus, we tax value from obligation, and we redistribute and redirect it for the benefit of the community. Use two examples. In the Dakotas, they had natural gas deposits, and in some of the northwestern states, they had gas deposits, And that enabled them, they were not Georgians, but they taxed the companies that came in and did that. And they have been able to give free education to their people up through college and postgraduate programs. So if this works, Alaska has revenues from oil. If you are an Alaska citizen, you get a citizen for a couple of thousand at the beginning of the year from the oil revenues. That's basically a principle of taxing resources, of making sure that the environment is not destroyed. Any place in the world you have the media show the oil spill outgoes in the Caribbean. In the United States mainstream media, I mean, I'm preaching to converted, I'm not telling you anything new. In the US mainstream media, you know that there was an oil spill. And what they did is they put some chemicals, and the chemicals made the oil sink about 6 feet under the surface, destroying all the wildlife underwater. I used to do wildlife underwater archaeology documentaries. I used to work with these people. So what they did is actually, you don't see it on the surface anymore. It looks like it's cleaned up. It's not cleaned up. It's the greatest environmental destruction on the planet. Nobody's talking about this in this country. Just when you go to Canada, you go to Europe. In Europe, they have, you're both familiar with other parts of the world. We have social democracy, labor parties. This is just normal. Here in the United States, we have, Chomsky was talking about it this morning, right? We have one party system, a two-party system, but they're both business parties. Where's the left-wing party here in the United States? What happened to the workers in the Chicago Haymarket? What happened? There were a couple of German anarchists, and since then the labor movement in the United States got crushed. I mean, that's terrible. So what we need to do is we need to rebuild, we need to make a coalition and do some new thinking and to completely change this story. We want to have a
point of order. When I was growing up, we were all watching Senator McCarthy on television. You know, when he's like, get up and say, point of order. So I have to point out what part of our disagreement is, and I think he gets Marx all wrong. If you read Terence McCarthy's introduction to Marx's Theories of Surplus Value, which was published in English's History of Economic Doctrines, he describes Marx was the last free market economist. Marx gave a speech before the Chartists, which I described in my book on trade development and foreign debt, where Marx said he's all for free trade, because what free trade of India and the backward regions is going to do, it's going to break down society. Marx is a free market economist because his idea of the free market was the opposite of Henry George. To Marx, a free market was a market free from the rentiers, free from the bankers, free from the landlords, not free for them to do their cheating that they're doing. That's the difference between us and them. Marx thought that once you free the market from the rent extractors, from the predators, then you have a natural evolution of capitalism into socialism.
But Michael, you're saying that George is put an end to this complete nonsense. That's complete nonsense.
Georgists are they are the bank lobby. They have been run for the last 50 years by the most scummy Wall Street people, including the scum that you cited, that you claim to be forecasting nasty little Austrian. Forget his name. Yes, Bold.
He's not an Austrian. We're talking about, Michael, we're talking about George. We're not talking about George.
Okay. You're right. Let's talk about it. Kai did mention something that we should include because it's going to be a part of any political party, and that's ecology. George was the lobbyist for the ecological records. George fought every ecological person and expelled them from the party for the following reason. The word ecology was coined, I think, in the 1870s by an American. The ecology was the root of the protectionist doctrine. And in my book on American protectionist takeoff, I give a whole summary of the protectionist agricultural statistics for agriculture, beginning in 1849, when the Patent Office Report of the United States had a wonderful, catchy title. I think it'll sell like wildfire, The Philosophy of Fertilizer. It was all about the export patterns of exporting the South's products, tobacco and the other Southern products, depleted the soil, And the Republicans who came in 1860 wanted to pick up the idea that the Whigs had been pushing for 2 decades to create a Department of Agriculture, to create statistics on soil depletion, so that when you calculate America's trade balance, you would include in the export figure the amount of soil, the amount it would cost to restore the fertility to the soil that was being depleted. George, by working with the slave owners and the old Southerners, joined the... Throw that lady out. George wrote this book on free trade, where he made a travesty. He refused to acknowledge any of the protectionist doctrines. His book was a cheap Democratic Party attack on the Republicans, attacking ecology, attacking protectionism, attacking industry.
That's crazy. He says nothing about
This is why I don't believe in working with George. That's the George. This is why despite Kai's good hope that maybe we could get the rent theory and we can't work with these people. This is what people discussed in the 1930s. So, do we have a united front or not? The united front with whom you don't want to get
Michael,
DD.
you and I work very well together.
Yeah, you and I work well together. We have a sense of humor.
Michael, there was one of the first articles George ever wrote as a journalist was on Abraham Lincoln and his assassination, and it was very clearly
Can you speak up,
very
please?
clear.
Against assassination?
He was against slavery. I mean, this
He
is
was
something.
very much against
He just.
And that's why he worked with the Southerners, with the Democratic Party, fighting against the North, against the Northerners, against the protectionists.
Anyone who white progress and poverty will know that he was not for the land. I mean, Michael, that's crazy.
He just worked for the South. In joining the Democratic Party, he worked for the slave power. He worked for Southern interests.
I assume you did read Progress and Poverty.
Yeah.
You did the social political economy.
I'm very sorry, I did it. It's one of the worst books I've ever read. I became research director of the Henry George School in 1994 because I was under the impression Henry George must be socialist. Imagine when I joined and I found out they used to be the Nazi Party. They were the German Nazi Party, not the American. The head of the Nazi intelligence at the Henry George School, the head of the school, told me that the day after war was declared, the head of the school escaped on a U-boat off the coast of Long Island. And went there to Germany. So I said, is this true? He said, I went to the library. Full of Nazi propaganda. I looked at who were teaching the courses. All this Holocaust denial. All this praise of Hitler. And when I
Not when I was director.
No, and as soon as I brought this to the attention of the fellow who was running the school, what was his name? George Collins. He immediately took all of the records of the school, all of the connections of the Nazis, and put them down in the cellar where they all got filled full of water and had to be thrown out. He went to the library, threw all the Nazi books into the...
Wait a minute, Mike, I'm confused. George Collins was a black guy.
Yeah,
That's right, George Collins was black.
yeah.
Right, and he ran the school.
That didn't stop him from trying to save the reputation of the school.
The Nazi Party was founded a generation after George died. So if we can have a discussion on Henry George, I agree with you. There were reactionary Georges which I deplore. I'm short of it.
Just in 1922, the Georges were the first group to join the Nazi Party. The school was run by the Nazi Party. The owner of the school was
One speaker at a time!
The Henry George School was founded by Oscar died. He was not a Nazi. If there was some crazy...
I met some of the teachers who were teaching Holocaust denial. They were all Jewish. And I thought, how is this? And teaching Holocaust denial. He said, I have a problem with my family.
Mr. Chairman, please, order.
Chair.
Just one final comment about that. I then went back to the head of the school and asked about that, why there were so many FBI men at the school, and they all begun after, right after
They
the
were
war.
taking classes, like.
And the discussion was talking about is that the FBI really liked Henry George. And it just happened they came right after war was declared, just happened after the head of the school escaped on a U-boat and went back to Germany. So, you know, I know that Kai is quite right, trying to separate the theory of rent from the fact that the Georgists were taken over by right-wingers. After all, we've seen Marxism taken over by Stalin, so we can certainly forgive George for losing after he was dead. But we do have to realize where these people are coming from, and because their ideal of a social organization is monarchy, they have lifetime memberships on the board, and you'll never be able to get these old guys off because they've all appointed their successors. So maybe I was utopian in thinking there could be some kind of...
We don't want a serious answer to this. So why do we have but how about let's have
Andy is king of the school.
Well, first of all, let me defend the school. I of course know nothing of quote this history that cites. And I can assure you, my roots are socialism, capitalism, Georgia, and certainly not fascist or any of that. In the school itself, as long as I've been there, it's never had any affinity for any of this kind of stuff, Michael. So those are sectarian fights going way back. It has nothing to do with the school. The school is quite progressive and modern now, and it accommodates a lot of schools of thought. And keep in mind, we incorporated a lot of your research into the syllabus. At least I have.
I haven't seen anything.
So you get emotional when you go there. We can't have you. But that's not the. But Michael, for all his anger against old Georges, when he talks about what's going on today and all of the theories, he's quite on the money. Forget Michael and the old Georges because that's history for us. Okay? Yeah. But since you wrote Super Imperialism on forward, it's been wonderful reading your work. So let's answer the question. Okay. Basically on what's happening today. Okay?
Yeah, I just want to point out something very briefly. I don't want to get into all that, but I worked as a legal proofreader in a major Manhattan corporate law firm, and I've got to tell you, what I look at is much more than gets in the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times business section. And that is a commercial real estate speculative boom. I know your colleague on Counterpunch, Mike Whitney, has written about that. It really looks like that a large part of the industrial capitalist world is terrified. They want to put that money into commercial real estate. They suppressed a commercial real estate bubble. But now it almost looks like, not like the opinion of the panel, whether a commercial real estate bubble is being blown, and it's because the capitalist class of the world is frightened over the situation right now.
Okay. A bubble in real estate is when prices are bid up on credit. I know many of the people who run these hedge funds, and they're buying for all cash. And the reason they're buying all cash is they're able to borrow money for their own business at 1/4%. If you can borrow money at very cheap, the only way that you can get a higher rate of return than the 0.5% you get on treasury bills is to buy real estate. So what you have now is the inversion of a bubble. What you have now are hedge funds coming in, not with bank money, but with total 100% ownership. You know how the motto of real estate, Donald Trump's real estate people for half a century has been that rent is for paying interest and never use your own money. Now, for the first time, they're spending 100% of their own money to buy real estate because there's no better deal in town. That's what quantitative easing is all about. By keeping the return on financial investment and the return on finance capital so low, they've all of a sudden made real estate a big deal. So there's all of this money by the 1% sitting on the sidelines that's putting in the money fully 100% ownership. Somebody asked me to join, and they said, you know, all I need, I can join at $5 million is the minimum that I could have put in to one of these funds. So I
Well, Michael, why wouldn't they then leak out of assets into industrial capital?
Because there's not as much money there as paying rent. They can't make the money on industrial capital with a market that's shrinking because of debt deflation. I mean, you have the stock market going up, but you're not having the domestic market going up because who can afford to pay for the manufacturers for corporate output if you have to now begin paying off the debt that you've run into to buy your houses in times past?
Or another thing, in my opinion, for all of the debt that you have, you know, because your real income hasn't risen.
Yeah, but is it going to be a problem, I mean, even if they're buying 100% cash on cheap real estate now, they're not on getting rent. They're not getting rent money for their investment, right?
Well, they're getting,
Better rate of return.
What I'm saying is, isn't there
That's
a
right,
danger of not being a bubble in the sense that they're not going to be able to get the
and remember, if you buy real estate, you can pretend that it's losing value by depreciating it. And you don't have to pay income tax on it, where you do have to pay income tax on industrial investments.
But take a look at the stock market as a similar kind of bubble right now. If the government gives you money, you don't lend it out to the real economy, you use it to buy the speculative assets, both real estate and stock market. I sell to you, you take a commission, you sell back to me, I take a commission. We're cleaning that money out, putting it in our pockets and go overseas, turn it into gold or something else, and when it collapses, you know the answer, they'll print more. So why wouldn't they do that? I mean, it's basically out of control. They made money the first time doing the same thing. Failure pays today in that world.
Well, would you say the title of this workshop, Wall Street's War to Impose Austerity, that the austerity is an indirect effect of the sucking out of all the value. And it's not a war as such, because theoretically, the capitalists have some interest in deepening the development of capitalism, one of which could be having a consumer class in the United.
What you're saying is logical, and that's what Marx
Is that
thought.
correct?
However, how did they give it up? Most of the people I know, we're now to take the money and run stage. They know that the game is over. There's no more optimism. They're taking what they can as fast as they can. That's why they're paying all the money they can in salaries and bonuses. Nothing is being saved for reserves in the banks. They're fighting putting returns into reserves. They're paying it all out to themselves at Goldman Sachs and the others as fast as they can, so that there'll be nothing left, so that there will be an empty bag, hopefully held by the pension funds for the workers.
Does everyone remember the movie The Count of Monte Cristo? Take your money, turn it into gold and silver, bury it somewhere overseas. When the deluge comes, you come back. Why not?
But where do you go in the meantime?
Well, there's many places. Not everything's going to go. Not everything's going to go down. They're basically breaking the working class here because it's high wage. I mean, essentially, they've sold out the American working class as irrelevant. If you think about it, international mental mindset here. Do you think the lower Manhattan cares about America? No. I mean, you can arbitrage. You can move offshore. You can move at the speed of light. Your assets. Why would you care about protecting your feedstock? You don't need to anymore. If you blow it up, you'll get paid anyway.
That's good finance going around the world. It's not only in the US.
Right. That's right. It's a global thing.
Yeah.
But think about it. Like I asked the class, take $100 million and run. Maybe somehow you'll figure it out. You don't care. It's almost a breakdown here, where the rich probably have no confidence and the poor have no options.
I'd like to ask a question. From the collapse of 2008, right? A lot of people lost their homes in foreclosure. Now, being a cynic, I want to know how much did the banks earn, to make off of reselling that foreclosed property?
Well, I think more important, the amount of capital gains up to that blow off, the amount of money made by Wall Street, they took the money and they put it offshore and they kept it there. They're fine. So it collapsed and they got bailed out. What's the question here?
How did the banks make extra money if they were in negative equity?
They already made it.
No, the answer is they turned over all of these mortgages to the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve gave them $2 trillion of government securities. It's a cash for cash swap. So they just swapped them to the government and the taxpayer took the loss.
But they're thinking just about the Orient.
What?
So foreclosed houses that are being held off the market.
Yeah, they're being held off, and usually they're sold at a great discount to the bank's favored customers. So it's all a insider deal, and they get their payoffs indirectly.
That's the houses that the funds are buying, that they think they're going to rent so much.
Yeah.
Michael, even if you say this isn't a bubble because it's not on borrowed money that these hedge funds are paying cash, but isn't it a dump and a pump and dump scheme? Because even if it's their money, they take the deal, they drive up the prices, the suckers come in, they bail, but those prices aren't real.
But it's gift money.
They want a rate of return.
The government gave it to them.
During the bubble years, all of the rent that they got was for paying interest. The landlord wasn't in it for the rent. The landlords made a deal with the banks. The banks get the rent, and that's what the Georges don't realize.
We realize it.
Yeah, you realize it. And Donald Trump's got the capital gain. But now, what they're after is the income. So the landlords now, it's back to the 19th century. The landlords get the income, and they will get a capital gain.
They'll get the
That's the
appreciation.
problem. Yeah.
The point is that but the prices, according to the article, are rising so fast that that's not a real increase. The people, the suckers who come in later, the prices are going to go back down again. These other guys who have gotten their money, it's like when they came to the tape in the old days in the stock market.
That's how it works.
I think I agree with that. I mean,
Yeah.
this is a bubble for different reasons.
Yeah, it's a different kind of a bubble. So I'm defining a bubble with credit expansion as opposed to just a speculative.
Unjustified.
More like the tulip bubble than the.
May I make a point that I think is salient? I have a lot of education of your kind. I personally worked in the Department of State and the Agency for International Development in the 70s in the warfare era. That was the best education I could receive. I'm working on a legal case that I hope will get into a class action against a true slumlord who lives upstate. I don't know how many of you in the workers will have known. The robber barons of the 1870s, this particular individual one night name refuses to talk to the press. The press is useless anyway. But we are getting verifications of what we theorized with the person I'm working on the case right now. And not only, it's minor, the offshore accounts, money is being laundered, and they have internal liaisons, the landlord here, with HUD, with HPD, in other words, with federal, state, and city agencies. I'm not really shocked about this. I'm very cynical. I also worked in chemical oceanography and a master's degree. I understand that too. And the other area that now is being created is this horrific debt on student loans.
Oh, that.
I had the privilege of going to New York University, doing graduate work between there and the United Nations, and getting one of the best educations. But it was another era. And I was able to obtain and maintain scholarships. And I loved my studies, and it was a great time to be in school. But I'll tell you, right now, in just doing research on this case, it has uncovered things that never shocked me. The money laundering is intense, and we'll have to bring him down eventually, this party, on tax evasion, the usual way. You know, follow the money. That's it. Follow the money. But I am a total warrior. I'm for justice. I'm not for vengeance. But this is very old friendships upstate between the robber barons and their descendants who are real tours in bed with the politicians. If you recall Joe Bruno, finally that. The story continues. We can be against fracking. But, you know, the power is tied up, and now we've had the Bloombergian empire. That's right, I call it
Yes.
an empire.
I agree.
We have Bloombergian empire. This is irrelevant to this story, but children are right now beside Stop and Frisk, which is directed basically toward people of color. We have the exact route. Once the kids are in the demolished public school system, they're already ready for the privatization of a prison life. It's very transparent to play on Obama's speech. As a friend of mine said, who's a brother, Obama just doesn't think he's black. We're in a class war across the planet. I stopped having bank accounts in 2007.
But you're right.
I closed my bank account because Citibank one day mailed me some really creative financing, and I researched the proper laws, and I served papers on it.
I've got a question.
Any more questions? Go ahead.
I've got a question for the panel. Now, for many years, I've realized that I call them democracy of the Republic radical, are all two sides of the same coin, and that coin is owned by the robber barons today. And so lately, I've been involved in the Ron Paul movement. He's now, he's retired now. And I'm wondering if you have any suggestions of who could possibly be running for office for Senate or president like that will have the Georgian philosophy or
Yeah, with Dennis, which he does very, very well.
Well, I think Dennis Kucinich is going to run again.
He is?
Is he?
Yeah.
I like him, yeah.
As a matter of fact, his other advisor, Dave Kelly, was supposed to be here, but hurt his back driving. So we met with him a month ago, and we're trying to figure out a way. The problem is that it's almost impossible to run as part of the Democratic Party. Because there's not sort of an agreement. You mentioned that they're both one party. The genius, people think that the Tea Party are sort of crazy people and wrecking the Republicans by moving so far to the right that they don't want to vote for them. But they missed the point that this is the idea. They're so far to the right that now Obama or whoever or Hillary can now move way, way to the right, and she'll still be not as far to the right. The whole idea that the Tea Party the idea is to pull the Democratic Party to the right.
Well,
they don't care for
the Tea Party was hijacked.
Already done that.
Tea Party isn't Ron Paul.
I know the Republicans will not let Ron Paul. We're not supporting Ron Paul.
Yeah,
Are you still,
I think people have.
I have a question relating to economics. What do you think right now the possibility of a banking collapse in the United States is either near term or long term?
I don't see it.
I don't see it either.
They can print
the money.
the money.
That's right.
So
It's going to be a bank.
As long as the government pays for oil internationally in American dollars, you pretty well got a quasi backing that keeps it within reason. That'd be a long time. Something else is liable to give up, will blow up before that, I think.
No bank.
Would the creation of a public bank and running tax revenues through it be able to take some of the power away from the private banking industry?
Yes, the trick is, of course, getting them to do it.
Well, this is what I'm blocking the name out.
Ellen Brown.
Ellen
Ellen, she's having a meeting, I think, this week in California on that. Yeah, that's what she
We would agree with that.
Steve Zolenga, another friend of ours, is going all the further and saying the whole idea expected a century ago by Marxists was that banking would be a public utility, and that it is in China and Russia. The reason China can't have a banking collapse is because the Chinese government can simply forgive the debt of the companies whose sales fall off. And when the debts are owed to you, it's easy to cancel the debts.
So
Obama can't cancel the debts because the debts are owed to his campaign contributors.
Yes. How do we get there?
Nationalize all the banks, that's a good thing, right?
I wanted to make a comment.
Yeah, but the problem is the people my point, the people who are making this happen, it doesn't happen by accident. These are people who are selected for their brains, they coalesce, they work together, they marry, they exchange jobs in government and business. It's almost like a hereditary class building up very strongly here, and unless we can counter them with some simple strategies like cutting them off with antitrust laws on media, and a few things that almost just recapture the Roosevelt era reforms, you could bring this to a kind of a stop. Without that, you got an institutional collapse here. You run away, you got elites running away.
Can I jump in about the public bank? Can I jump in about the public bank? Yeah, I'm the New York coordinator for the Public Banking Institute. So I was just up in Albany, as a matter of fact, at a press conference. There is a bill in New York to create a public bank, or at least a study to create a public bank. And it's got one sponsor and 7 co-sponsors now. So it's starting to take off. If you want to talk about that some more, see me after this. Okay.
Question, will the Trans-Pacific Partnership basically make public banking illegal?
It's one of their aims.
I don't know the details of that.
Yes, they want to do that.
Because there's nothing, I looked at the program and I expected to be a lot of the Trans-Pacific Partnership and a threat to a lot of the things that people are working on. The program.
Well, I'm a member of industrial trade organizations that have been against this. It's just because you're giving up too much government autonomy locally. But, you know, it's a Clinton world. You know, I mean, and they pretty much can make this happen, and they will make it happen. The American people have lost their mojo here. You know, they let it get away. They let it get away.
One of the negotiators for TPP did say that they have the eyes on the state banks. They want to get rid of any state institution, including public banks.
Went to the UNW website, nothing on the TPP. The AFL-CIO website has. If you go to search, you can find stuff, but nothing on the face page, no action, no mobilization.
I want to say something. I want to say something about plain old-fashioned blue collar. I think we all have, to an extent, blue collar roots, and I share Michael's frustration with reactionary Georgism, and I actually aspire to reactionary Georgism. And so I've been fighting these people. I disagree with you that I don't think that George is quite as reactionary himself as you make him. I wanted to say something about my roots. Family history, family law has it that one of our ancestors, his name was Karl Hehner, was a workers' delegate in the first German parliament in Frankfurt, 1815. And there's not one person in my family who's not proud of it. And there's not one person. I was brought up in what was called the Red Hessen, near Frankfurt. Word dignified. If you do not treat your workers right, you are just scum. I mean, you can be a Robert Owen, you can be a whatever, you can be an entrepreneur, but if you don't treat your workers right, you are scum. And I grew up, the first part of economics is labor. And I believe, I read George, and Andy correct me or Michael correct me if I'm wrong, I read George that is also history. Labor. It's labor and land.
He was a printer.
Everything, I think he was a printer. He was in poverty. He was in dire poverty. He did not start that out in some aspect. So I believe we have land and labor, meaning resources and human exertion, and everything else is an accretion. And we all agree we need neo-Georgism or neo-Marxism. We need to tax surplus. We need to tax all this funny money, all this stuff that's just idle, that's just for people who get like something for nothing or get millions of millions. I think it looked like we were fighting. But I think there's some bedrock. There's some bedrock.
These guys were okay. It was the Georges that I was criticizing.
That's what I'm thinking about. Thinking about that.
A consultant for Dennis Pacific?
Yes.
My wife loves him.
We say the banking, you know, we're going to bail out the banks again. We're going to have to do that again. We're going to do something. So I would like to, your impression of when that happens again, what will go on in this country for the life of people, and what institution you begin to fail and go under.
People will get poorer, slower, and slow crash.
That's it. Well, that I know. That I know.
The next crisis, will there be confiscation like in the
That's the plan of the FDIC. FDIC and Bank of England. It's in a report.
Yeah. I mean,
It's a report that came out in December.
Obama says,
They plan
I'm
on
not
doing
here to
it.
support the banks and enable them to pay more salaries. You don't represent the government. He knows exactly what's going to happen. As soon as he said there's going to be no confiscation, I thought, oh, here it comes.
macro effects of fiscal policy as opposed to monetary. We already do quantitative easing, but there's a school of thought to which are associated, UMKC, that says that exaggerated fiscal policy is going to make a big difference in rebalancing. The question is, does it go to financialization? Because people buy chickpeas, it takes a lot of people to buy it, but Minsky pointed out real estate goes to the high bidder, it just takes one high bidder to boost up the price, doesn't eventually go to the rentiers.
I don't know how many of you follow the modern monetary theory at University of Missouri, Kansas City. We have our own website. I'm on the faculty. The basis of modern monetary theory is you say that when the government runs a deficit, this is a public sector, private sector surplus by definition. It's like a teeter totter. That's true, but within the private sector, they don't separate the financial and rentier sector from the rest of the economy, and that's what you're criticizing. And I'm working on a model now with Steve Keen and Dirk Besmer up at the Fields Institute of Canada to do just that.
I came to the panel because I thought it was on rentiers, so I'm not sure if this question still makes sense. I'm very confused by all the money laundering that goes on because there's massive outflows of capital to other currencies. So I was wondering if somebody could explain to me why it doesn't destabilize certain currencies, have massive outflows go to foreign banks. I'm confused by that.
Money laundering is what stabilized the American economy. When I was at Chase Manhattan, the State Department came to us and said, the most liquid people in the world are criminals. We've got to finance the Vietnam War. You've got to open up branches in all of these islands for money laundering. We need criminal money to save the dollar. And there was the whole argument in Congress, do you have tax withholding for criminal holdings in treasury securities or foreign holdings? And the government, quite rightly, said, you can't tax the criminals, they don't like to pay taxes. We need their money. So criminal money laundering is what keeps us afloat. Exactly, that's American policy. So when they talk about closing it down, don't believe them at all. They came to Chase and said, do the right thing, be a good citizen, go into money laundering and help us. The CIA had all this cocaine money. They wanted to help our doctors.
Would stabilize us.